times I almost lost the fight. I'd grown so tired, I'd given up on life. In the depths of my despair, and you drew me near. Somehow I knew you were good, and I felt no fear. But you met me right there in the pit of myself. You lifted me up and you drew me up into your arms of grace, into your sea of mercy. Out of my darkest days, you came and rescued me. You traded my tears.
We're continuing, as I said, in the book of Acts. We made it halfway through chapter 25, so that's where we're going to pick it up today. The Apostle Paul has been held captive in Caesarea by the Roman official, the Roman governor Felix, held him illegally without charges for more than 2 years. And then Felix, because he was such a corrupt rascal, was recalled by Caesar, and he was replaced by a new governor named Festus. And Festus wasn't much better than Felix. When he got there, he realized what was going on. He went to Jerusalem to meet with the Jewish leadership, the prominent men of Israel, of Judaism there in Jerusalem. And as he met with them, first thing they did was start talking about Paul. This guy doesn't deserve to live, da-da-da-da-da. So they have this hearing, and the governor says, this, I don't really see it, but, he says to Paul, since Paul was a Roman citizen and actually had rights, he said, would you be willing to go with me back to Jerusalem to stand trial before the Jewish High Council, the Sanhedrin? And Paul recognized a setup when he saw one, and he said, no, I'm not willing to do that. I appeal to Caesar, which was his right as a Roman citizen. So that's where we left off. Verse 13 says, after some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. Now, just for a couple of minutes here, what is that about? Well, King Herod Agrippa II was just another politician, basically, but he was from a long line. King Herod the Great was the appointed king. It's not like a traditional monarchy, but the Roman emperor had appointed Herod as king over that region, more than just Israel in reality. He was the king when Jesus was born, Herod the Great. Well, then his son, Herod Agrippa I, came along. Giant area, humongous area of responsibility to govern. But again, he's an appointee. He's just a puppet king, if you will. And then when Herod Agrippa II came along, because Agrippa I died. And Agrippa II was 17 when his father died. And the Caesar, I don't remember who it was, but the emperor at the time said, he's only 17 years old. He's not up to governing that entire, expansive region, but we'll give him this little part over here for the time being, and so continue the dynasty, continue the line. Then later, as he was a little older, some political maneuvering, whatever, he ended up with more. So by this time, he has under his area of responsibility the entire region that encompasses Israel. So there's a sense in which King Herod Agrippa II, was in like a supervisory sort of a role over Festus, the governor of Judea, because Judea is a small province within that larger region. Everybody tracking with me? So they come. Herod, it says King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. Festus is the newly arrived governor. So here's this guy that is sort of like his boss, but it's not totally functioning that way, it would seem, in just reading, what the historians have to say. But they came to welcome him. Now, who is Bernice? Well, that's where the soap opera gets really fascinating. If you remember, Felix's wife was named Drusilla, and her father was King Herod Agrippa the First. So she was Agrippa the Second's sister, right? Well, so is Bernice. When you read this, it seems like they're husband and wife. And apparently, they lived as though they were. Fascinating, scandalous kind of stuff that went on in the first century AD. And no, it wasn't normal then either. It was apparently one of the worst kept secrets in the Roman Empire, but Agrippa II and Bernice had an incestuous love affair going on for decades. Bishop A.C. Hervey's pulpit commentary said it this way. Herod Agrippa II, he says, was the one who he built the palace at Jerusalem, which overlooked the temple, and gave great offense to the Jews. Because, the temple was supposed to be the highest place, and he built a palace overlooking it. He was the last of the Herods and reigned above 50 years. Bernice was his sister, but was thought to be living in an incestuous intercourse with him. She'd been the wife of her uncle Herod, Prince of Chalcis, and on his death lived with her brother. And by the way, that's when the Agrippa II inherited a larger area of responsibility. It says when his uncle died. It says she then for a while became the wife of Polemo, king of Sicilia, but soon returned to Herod Agrippa. She afterwards became the mistress of Vespasian and of Titus in succession. This must have been an incredibly beautiful woman, because whoever was in charge wanted her, right? Even her own brother. So, Agrippa and Bernice come to the capital. They come to Caesarea to welcome the newly arrived governor. And verse 14 continues, when they'd been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there's a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem, asking for a judgment against him. To them I answered, it is not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face and has the opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him. Therefore, when they had come together without any delay, the next day I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. So the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice had come with great pomp and had entered the auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city, at Festus' command, Paul was brought in. Now, do we have that photo? Were you able to pull that up, JP? Last Sunday, I told you guys, thank you, brother. Last Sunday, I told you guys that the theater where this is believed to have all taken place. Remember, this was a big deal. You've got, King Agrippa coming, and with great pomp and ceremony, all the prominent men of the city, everybody who was anybody was gathered together, and then Paul was brought in. But this was about more than just Paul. This was about Festus being newly arrived. It was about King Herod Agrippa II with Bernice. It's like just this big deal that they're making, and that's where such big deal ceremonies and parties would have taken place. Today they use it for concerts and special events, and I know I couldn't find it. I had a much better photograph than this one, but it's in use today, and the what you can't really see if you're sitting there in the stadium-style seating, looking beyond the stage, like immediately beyond the stage is the Mediterranean Sea. It's just a beautiful setting. But that's where all this was happening. Verse 24, Festus said, King Agrippa and all the men who are present here with us, you see this man about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. I have nothing certain to write to my Lord concerning him. Therefore, I have brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the examination has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to specify the charges against him. Listen, that's like radical understatement. But Festus found himself in a really bad position because as a Roman citizen, Paul had the right, if he was being treated unjustly, to appeal directly to Caesar. It would be like if every U.S. citizen had the right to appeal directly to the president, and then the president had an obligation to hear the case personally. That's the way things worked in the Roman Empire. So Paul said, no, I'm not going to be treated like this. I appeal to Caesar. The trouble for Festus was that he had already been in prison for 2 years with no charges against him. So the first thing he should have done really is just release him. Instead of that little maneuver that he tried, thinking, maybe I can placate these prominent Jewish leaders in Jerusalem if I can get Paul to agree to go with me. Maybe he's dumb enough to go, and Paul said, no, I appeal to Caesar. So now the whole thing is backfired, and Festus is in a really bad spot because there are no criminal charges. Paul hasn't done anything that was against the Roman law. Festus was going to look like an incompetent fool unless he could come up with some kind of believable charge to send with Paul to say to Caesar, this is what this man is accused of. Because as it stands right now, the accusation is simply, he says that a dead guy isn't dead. That was the accusation, you understand? He says that Jesus of Nazareth is alive, even though everybody else says, all the Jewish leadership says he's dead. Verse 18, Festus had explained it to Agrippa. When Paul's accuser stood up, he says, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. That was the issue. The thing that I find totally fascinating about this whole mess is that Festus and Agrippa were apparently completely oblivious to the profound significance of their situation. Festus was so focused on his personal dilemma concerning Paul's imprisonment and so in the dark regarding the prophetic Hebrew scriptures that he failed to grasp the gravity of the actual dispute. Herod Agrippa, on the other hand, according to the Jewish historian Josephus, was a bit of an expert on the Jewish scriptures. He should have recognized the importance of the argument, the significance of this disagreement. The dispute between the Sanhedrin and the Apostle Paul was over Paul's claim to have met Jesus of Nazareth while Paul was en route to Damascus with letters from the high priest giving him authority to arrest Christians. That trip to Damascus, when he claimed to have encountered Jesus alive and well, took place 3 or 4 years after the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. The Sanhedrin claimed he was dead. And Paul himself had believed that. He had sincerely believed that Jesus was dead. But when you meet someone and have repeated conversations with them, it becomes pretty difficult to believe they're dead, right? It's not like you can say, oh, it must have been a ghost. I guess I saw a ghost, or I guess I had a whatever. I guess maybe I hallucinated or whatever. No, this Paul tells us in different places, his encounters with Jesus continued. It wasn't just the one Damascus Road experience. Oh yeah, that was for real, but it continued. It continued. Jesus himself, like when Paul gives us the passage explaining the Holy Communion, the cup and the bread. He said, I'm delivering to you what was delivered to me. I'm telling you what Jesus told me. These encounters with Christ continued for Paul. So, yeah, he believed that Jesus is alive. But there's another really important question that comes out of this. Does it even matter? Does it matter whether the central figure of Christianity, Jesus Christ, is alive or dead? There are seminary professors, scores of pastors who say, no, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. There are professors at major seminaries all over the world today who claim that the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the physical resurrection of Jesus, didn't happen, and that doesn't affect our Christian faith at all. Listen to me carefully. That's absurd. Of course it matters whether or not he's alive or dead. Of course it matters. The question of whether Jesus of Nazareth is alive or dead is a single most significant, the supremely important question, not just of our faith, but of all of human history. And over the next few minutes, I'm hoping you'll see why I say that. Now, as usual, I'm going to give you 3 points. Point number 1, Jesus of Nazareth is alive. And I belabor that because I find that a lot of Christians never really take the time to consider it. Here's what I mean by that. We say it. Jesus is alive. You know, we proclaim things that we haven't thought through or we haven't digested. I remember when I was training to be a retail store manager 40 years ago, they would send us these bulletins every week. And we got all kinds of paperwork from the company headquarters, right? And then we would, every week we would get one at least, and at the top it would say, read and digest. I'll never forget the first time I got one of those bulletins. Read and digest. And I learned very quickly I had better digest it because there might be a pop quiz. I might get a phone call from our district manager or even a visit, and he would ask about every detail on that bulletin because they were important. These things were important to the company. It wasn't just stuff that you just kind of glance over it and whatever and needed to be aware. No. They wanted you to digest it. You needed to be able to not only recite it, but explain it, right? Everybody with me? Digest it. There are things that you and I as Christians need to digest. Jesus is alive. Have you ever taken the time to chew on that and digest it? He's alive. When I was a young man, a young Christian, after my encounter with Christ, when he came to me in the front seat of my Thunderbird and confronted me. No, not physically. I didn't see him. I didn't hear audible voices, but I knew he was there. Nonetheless, he cut through all the Jack Daniels straight to my soul, and I knew who it was. But I didn't think about the fact that when he rose out of that tomb, physically, he stayed who he was. Physically. Yeah, I mean, we see in the scriptures, he has a different body than the one he had before he was crucified, and yet it's the same. How do we know? Because when he confronted Thomas, the one we refer to as the doubter, he said, Thomas, you need to see the scars? Here, put your finger in my side. Sounds like the same body to me. And yet, with that new body, apparently, he wasn't limited in the same way he could pass through walls. It was changed, but still physical. Still physical. Jesus is alive. Now, what I want us to look at for a few minutes are the implications of the opposite position. What if he is dead? Now, hopefully you're clear. I'm convinced he is alive. But what if he is dead? What if he is dead? So what? What if he is dead? Well, if he's dead, Christianity was built upon a foundation of sand. There's no substance underneath the Christian faith if Jesus never rose from the dead. If he's just another guy, but he was such a brilliant philosopher. I've had people want to argue with me about this. But just when you read his teachings, he was a brilliant teacher. He was a liar if he's dead. It's like C.S. Lewis famously put it. He was either like the worst deceiver, the most horrible liar ever to live, or he was an absolute lunatic, a nutcase, or the Son of God. You don't have a whole lot of options, right? If Jesus is dead, well then you got to pick one. He was either a lunatic or a complete liar. And we have built everything on a massive deception. We've been cheated out of enormous amounts of time and resources and energy if he's dead. If Jesus is dead, well then there's no hope for humanity. There's no hope of there ever being true social justice. Because power just corrupts people. When you look at human history, there's absolutely no indication whatsoever that humanity has ever been or ever would be inclined towards social justice. Just look at history. Now, humanity has always been corrupt and has always been inclined toward corruption, toward whoever's powerful is in charge. Meaning that might makes right. That's the inclination of humanity. There will never be social justice if Jesus is dead. Evil men do prosper in this life, and they will continue to prosper forever and ever if Jesus is dead. If Jesus is dead, then the suffering of humanity, the birth defects, the diseases, the genocidal maniacs wiping out entire ethnic groups, none of it makes any sense at all, because the books will never be balanced and it will continue. And you see, if Jesus is dead, then everything else predicted in the Scriptures must be called into question. And if that's the reality, then there's no basis for expecting a day of judgment in which God balances the books by rewarding the faithful and punishing the wicked. Paul would express it this way to the Christians in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 19, he said, "If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men the most pitiable." In other words, if Christianity is nothing more than a philosophical system of beliefs which has nothing whatsoever of supernatural power or eternal significance, well then, our ethics have no true foundation. Our expectation for any real justice on earth, completely unwarranted and unsustainable. And our suffering and sacrifices for the sake of the gospel have all been wasted. But again, don't get depressed. Jesus is alive. He's not dead. Point number two. Life makes no sense. No sense whatsoever, unless Jesus of Nazareth really is alive. Because see, every single one of us as human beings, we have kind of this built-in, this innate sense of fairness. I mean, even a little kid, right? It's one of the first things. You don't have to teach them about it. Little toddlers, as soon as they can start talking, as soon as they can start complaining, as soon as they can start whining, one of the first things that will come out of their mouths, with an encounter, with a sibling or another kid at the playground, it's not fair. That's not fair. I remember having a long conversation with my son David about fairness. Life isn't fair at all. But our innate sense of fairness, our common awareness that there is such a thing as morality, a moral compass, right and wrong. The fact that that's valid, there is such a thing as right and wrong. But it doesn't make any sense at all without Jesus, unless Jesus conquered death. It really does just come back to the survival of the fittest and whoever can dominate. But here's the thing that occurred to me as I was writing this. Logical arguments don't prove anything whatsoever about Jesus being alive or dead. But they do give us some evidence. They give us like an evidentiary support, if you think about it. Just like the sacrifices and suffering of Christ's followers, like Paul. Because Paul certainly sacrificed, and he most definitely suffered because of what he believed. Apparently, he really believed it. There are those who would have us believe, there are those who have convinced themselves that the apostles maintained the deception because they were creating a religion to give themselves power. But just look at the life of Paul. Paul's life was a powerless life. Paul gave up power and position in order to follow Jesus. He spent a lot more time in dungeons and prison cells and enduring riots and difficulties than he ever would have as a Pharisee. Had he just continued life as his family had laid it out for him? You know what I mean? Because remember, his family was apparently fairly well off. They had enough resources to send him from Tarsus to Jerusalem as a child, as certainly a very young teenager, and maybe earlier than that, to study under one of the most prestigious rabbis in Jerusalem, if not the most prestigious rabbi at the time, Gamaliel. He gave all that up, walked away from it. He was highly regarded until he came out as a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. And he became the enemy. He paid a terrible price for following Jesus. Not a religion. Jesus. That's so important, see, because I followed a religion as a kid, as a young man. And not really, but at best, I followed a religion. And I encounter a lot of people who call themselves Christians today who are doing the same thing. You know, I'm a Catholic. I hear that, I'm Catholic. Well, nobody's going to be checking your credentials at the pearly gates. Are you Catholic? Oh, okay, you're good. No, it's not going to work. Are you Baptist? Oh, yeah, you're good. No, it's not going to work that way. Paul wrote this in 2 Corinthians 11:16. He said, I say again, let no one think me a fool. Now, quick little side note, I had never noticed that statement from Paul. That's one of those I had not digested. He's like, don't let anybody think I'm a fool. I'm no fool. And then he goes on, he says, if otherwise, in other words, if you do think I'm a fool, well then just give me a minute. Just bear with me. If you think I've lost my mind, if you think I'm a fool, then just, well then bear with me. Hear me out. Let me talk like a fool for a few minutes, that I also may boast a little. What I speak not according to the Lord, but as it were foolishly, in this confidence of boasting, seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I also will boast. For you put up with fools gladly, since you yourselves are wise. For you put up with it if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if one takes from you, if one exalts himself, if one strikes you on the face. To our shame, I say that we were too weak for that. But in whatever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly, I'm bold also. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. There's a fascinating statement. He's like, I've died more than once because of what I believe. From the Jews 5 times, I received 40 stripes, minus 1. 5 times, he says, I was beaten to the point of death. That's the idea. 5 times. 3 times, I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils amongst false brethren, in weariness and toil and sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. And besides the other things, what comes upon me daily? My deep concern for all the churches. Who is weak and I'm not weak? Who is made to stumble and I do not burn with indignation? If I must boast, I will boast in the things which concern my infirmity. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is blessed forever, knows that I am not lying. Do you hear what Paul is saying? He's like, okay, I'm gonna speak like an idiot for a minute. But look at my life. Look at what I've suffered. I'm no fool. And look at what I've suffered to follow Jesus. In Philippians chapter 3, he wrote something similar, but this time he wrote more about his sacrifice. I'm going to read this one to you, something I rarely do. I'm going to read the paraphrase from the Message. He says in Philippians 3, beginning at verse 2, steer clear of the barking dogs, those religious busybodies. All bark and no bite. All they're interested in is appearances. By the way, I have to say this. That's religion in a nutshell. Just focused on whatever looks good on the outside. Let's just pretend we're all clean and good and neat and we've got it all together. And focus on the superficial stuff. Never really acknowledging or dealing with the heart. All they're interested in is appearances. Knife-happy circumcisers, I call them. The real believers are the ones the Spirit of God leads to work away at this ministry, filling the air with Christ's praise as we do it. We couldn't carry this off by our own efforts, and we know it. Even though we can list what many might think are impressive credentials, you know my pedigree. A legitimate birth, circumcised on the 8th day, an Israelite from the elite tribe of Benjamin, a strict and devout adherent to God's law, a fiery defender of the purity of my religion, even to the point of persecuting Christians, a meticulous observer of everything set down in God's law book. The very credentials these people are waving around as something special, I'm tearing up and throwing out with the trash, along with everything else I used to take credit for. And why? Because of Christ. Yes, all the things I once thought were so important are gone from my life, compared to the high privilege of knowing Christ Jesus as my master firsthand. Everything I once thought I had going for me is insignificant. Dog dung. I've dumped it all in the trash so that I could embrace Christ and be embraced by Him. I didn't want some petty, inferior brand of righteousness that comes from keeping a list of rules, when I could get the robust kind that comes from trusting Christ, God's righteousness. I gave up all that inferior stuff so I could know Christ personally, experience His resurrection power, be a partner in His suffering, and go all the way with Him to death itself. If there was any way to get in on the resurrection from the dead, I wanted to do it. I'm not saying I have this all together, that I've made it, but I am well on my way, reaching out for Christ, who has so wondrously reached out for me. Friends, don't get me wrong. By no means do I count myself an expert in all of this, but I've got my eye on the goal, where God is beckoning us onward to Jesus. I'm off and running, and I'm not turning back. See, Paul says that he not only had suffered tremendously, but he had willingly surrendered every privilege, every position that most of his peers aspired to. It was everything to them. But it was nothing to Paul, because he had met Jesus. And he had come to understand that knowing Jesus is everything. That used to baffle me. I couldn't really see it because I was thinking only in terms of emotion. But it isn't about emotion. It's practical. Jesus is the author of everything. According to the Gospel of John, everything that is, He made. It's all His. He tells us in Luke chapter 12, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. What is the kingdom? Well, it's everything. So in Christ, everything is yours. Everything is yours. And I have people, you don't understand, Pastor. You don't understand how hard it is. I have to work and take care of this and because I have these obligations and these responsibilities. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. In Christ, you have everything. In Christ, we have everything. And if our eyes are on Him, in other words, if He really is the center of everything in our lives, and we're looking to Him actively, you can't be dumb enough to miss out. Because He will make sure that you have everything that He has allocated to you. Now I have to remind myself of this all the time because I'm human. But the Bible says that those who are in Christ are joint heirs of God the Father with Christ. Meaning the kingdom is yours. You're going to have what you need. You're going to have His protection. You're going to have His wisdom. You're going to have His provision. You're going to have everything that He has. Every good thing is yours. And you don't have to make things happen for yourself. You just have to follow Jesus and let Him lead you to the things that He has allocated to you, the inheritance that's already yours. Listen, Paul had no doubt whatsoever. Jesus is alive. And we can see that. Because Jesus is alive, Paul said to the Athenian philosophers, we have assurance that God will one day complete what He started. There will be a judgment day. There will be a balancing of the books. By the way, that's point number 3. Since Jesus is alive, there is hope, and there will be justice. Do you know what the Bible teaches is that God is already in the process of recreating humanity. The human race is already being recreated by our Creator. Already. It's already begun. It's begun, well, in people like me. And I hope you, but I don't know you, so I don't know. I can't see what's happening in your soul, but I know what He's doing in mine. From the day He spoke to me in the front seat of that Thunderbird, He hasn't stopped. He hasn't stopped changing, transforming, teaching, convicting, confronting, correcting. But in that moment, He changed who I was. He gave me a desire to know Him and to be like Him. He gave me something I didn't have before. Life. And a spiritual life that can't be taken away. It's forever. And it increases bit by bit, day by day. And the beautiful thing is, according to the Scriptures, it will always be increasing bit by bit. One day the books are going to balance. What that means is that one day everything will make sense. Everything. I look forward to that because I spend a lot of time, bewildered, scratching. It's like, okay, I don't understand. I don't understand. I had a conversation with another pastor. I used to feel guilty about this, and I wouldn't admit it to others. But every pastor feels that way. It's not abnormal. Some things just don't seem to make sense in this life. Read the book of Job. Job was like, I wish we could have a conversation because I'm just not understanding why you let my whole family die. And all of my stuff. It's like I went from wealthy to having absolutely nothing just virtually overnight. I'm not understanding it because I know that I haven't done anything to deserve this. Job was so confused. There are things that happen that don't make sense. One day the Bible says it'll all make sense. Listen to this, Revelation chapter 19. The Apostle John, in this vision, this revelation of Jesus Christ, he says, after these things, I heard a loud voice of a great multitude in heaven saying, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and honor and power belong to the Lord our God, for true and righteous are his judgments. At the end of everything, every living creature is going to cry out that statement. True and righteous are his judgments. What does that mean? What it means is every living creature is going to recognize he knew what he was doing all along. He knew what he was doing all along. True and righteous. The perfect judge makes perfect judgments. These things that we have questions about, these things that just don't make sense right now, and we just don't understand. It'll all make sense. It'll all make sense. And one of the reasons that some of those things are going to make sense is that he's finally going to set it all straight. He's finally going to balance the books. I've shared this with you before, but one of the most radical revelations I've had from God in my entire life, and I'm going to ask the band to come back up because I'm way past done. One of the most radical revelations I've had in my life is that when all evil is eliminated from God's creation, all evil, the evil that I battle in me, I'll no longer have to battle it. One day it just hit me. One day I'm going to be so completely free that there's no temptation. I won't have to fight the urge to bite somebody's head off or pound them into the pavement. I won't have to fight the temptations that I have to fight. And neither will you. Neither will you. So much of our suffering is self-inflicted. That'll be gone. It'll all be gone. The righteous one will cleanse you of all unrighteousness on that day. You know, one of the most famous sermons of all time, I think it was George Whitefield, a sinner in the hands of an angry God. And he preached a message about Judgment Day. And yes, it's a fearful thing for those who don't know God, who don't know Christ personally. But it's such an exciting thing for the family to look forward to. Because the promise of Judgment Day is that I will finally be pure and clean. And everything will be new. New heavens and new earth in which there is only pure righteousness. Because Jesus is alive. Amen? Would you stand? Father, I thank you for these people who've gathered here. I thank you for the ones that you've gathered to watch this online. Lord, I pray that you'd filter out anything I've said today that was a hindrance to what you intend to accomplish in people's souls. And I pray that you, Holy Spirit, please touch every single one of them Make every one of them aware of your presence, aware of your love, aware of the availability of life and the power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ to work in their individual life. Father, I remember the moment when all of a sudden the gospel made sense. It just, all of a sudden, I understood that you loved me and you just wanted me to be part of your family, and you wanted to teach me that Jesus just wanted to teach and lead me. I pray for these people that you would give to them what you gave to me, just that pivotal moment, that epiphany, where you touch them and you speak to them and you open the eyes of their understanding, you remove the veil, the blinders. Set them free to be yours wholeheartedly. To live forever, one with you, one with the Father, one with your church.
Many times I almost lost the fight. I'd grown so tired, I'd given up on life. In the depths of my despair, and you drew me near. Somehow I knew